guest, director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, author of 30 books. First, however, I just want to review some of the norms that we ask you honor during our program tonight, and that is to show respect to everyone, right? No put downs. If you do disagree agreeably, and encourage all voices. Try to stay on topic in the chat, though. That would be wonderful. With that, I want to go to Medea Benjamin, our co-founder, along with Jody Evans, to give us a few news updates. But first, I'm just going to share a couple of my own. And that is that some of you may have read that the courts, thank you, Center for Constitutional Rights, for bringing this case against a contractor who was found responsible for conspiring to torture 3 prisoners at Abu Ghraib. One was a fruit vendor, one was a middle school principal, another was a journalist. And the judgment was a $42 million judgment. Shout out to the Arab Resource Organizing Center, AROC, in the Bay Area, and to CODEPINK Bay Area and others who successfully pushed Alameda County to divest, I think it was $9 million from, or rather $32 million from Caterpillar, thereabouts, because we know the Caterpillar has been used, those tractors have been used to level homes in the West Bank so that Israel can demolish them and take control of the land. With that, I now go to Medea Benjamin.
Yes, and it's nice to see people introducing themselves in the chat. Please do that. And remember, you can also put your questions in the chat. So we have a lot of updates for you. Some of you might know that we have been also involved in the issues about trying to stop a war in Ukraine, and that we have been working with a group that includes former weapons inspector Scott Ritter, Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Colin Powell, Larry Wilkerson, and others. And we spent the last 2 weeks going around in Congress with our wonderful group of volunteers, trying to drum up support for stopping a war with Russia and a potential nuclear war or World War III, given Biden's reckless decision to allow Ukraine to use U.S. ATACMS deep inside of Russia. And I must say we found quite a positive reception among some of the members of Congress that we met with, more so among the Republicans than the Democrats. The Republicans are split, maybe even down the middle. Those who want to support Trump and his effort to bring both sides to the negotiating table, and those who want to keep sending more weapons to Ukraine. We had a chance to have some meetings directly with Congress people, and the range was extraordinary, from progressive Democrats like Jim McGovern to centrist Democrats like Adam Smith, to, I don't know how you characterize Marjorie Taylor Greene from the Republican Party, and also with a senior staff person from Mike Johnson, who is Speaker of the House. We have been pushing a bill introduced by a conservative Republican, Clay Higgins, to stop the use of U.S. ATACMS inside of Russia. And we will continue working on these issues in the new Congress. But I just want people to know that the wonderful group of volunteers who come to Congress with us decided that we wouldn't try to disguise ourselves like some centrists or Republicans, that we would go with our normal gear, which is usually wearing keffiyehs and T-shirts that say "Stop supporting genocide" and that kind of thing. And that we have been well received in every office. And we think it's important that they see that we're not crazy people, that we can talk to them about something that we agree with, even if they don't agree with us on the Israel issue. And of course, what helps open the door is us talking about how reckless Biden has been on this, and how we hope that Trump will follow through on his promise to try to end that war. Moving on to the issue of Gaza, there is a lot of excitement in the air about a ceasefire deal happening in the next 2 weeks. There is momentum for this for a couple of reasons. People in Gaza are just worn down, and that includes Hamas. There is tremendous pressure inside Israel as well. And the fact that there was a ceasefire in Lebanon is another positive sign. And the Trump administration and Trump himself has really been pushing on Netanyahu to come to a deal, and has also been threatening Hamas that if there's not a deal done by the time he comes in, there will be hell to pay. It's hard to think of what more hell to pay than the people of Gaza have been experiencing. But Trump does want to see a ceasefire. It's somewhat similar to the ceasefire proposal that had been proposed back in May that Hamas had accepted, but Israel kept adding new conditions. But the talk is that Hamas is making more concessions, that the first phase will be like a 45-day phase in which they will release women, civilian hostages, women wounded, in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, as well as for Israel pulling back from the north, allowing people to go back to the north. But the huge concession it seems that Hamas is willing to make is that in the first phase, there will still be Israeli troops along what's called the Philadelphia corridor, which is on the Gaza side of the Rafah border, as well as that that corridor that breaks Gaza into two strips. And so we'll see. As I mentioned, there have been times when it looked like a deal was very close, and then Israel put on more conditions. So we will see if indeed there is a deal. And there are 62 hostages that are still believed to be alive. So the first phase, a number of them would be released. Let's also recognize that going in the opposite direction are the members of the far right in Netanyahu's coalition that want to annex Gaza, want to create new settlements in Gaza, and want to expel Palestinians. So we will see where that goes. There's also a lot of talk about who would govern Gaza and a number of different options that are being put forth on the table from all sides, including from Egypt and the UAE. Some things that are happening in Congress. The budget for the military, known as the NDAA, it's passed on the House side. It's going to be passed in the Senate probably tomorrow. It is gargantuan. It's almost $1 trillion. I think it's $895 billion. There are a number of Democrats that voted against it, some because it included a provision that would not allow any health care for the trans children of military people, and others voted against it in the Democratic Party because it was so enormous. We'll see some Democrats voting against it in the Senate, but it will unfortunately pass. It'll be interesting to see how much Trump's new DOGE, the commission they are creating to cut government waste, fraud, and abuse, will actually take on some of the Pentagon money, which is where most of the waste, fraud, and abuse is happening. There is an anti-Semitism amendment that Schumer has been trying to attach to the NDAA when it goes through the Senate. That's the one that we have been fighting against because it conflates anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel. It looks like that won't be on the NDA, but Schumer is trying to get it to be attached to what's called the continuing resolution, which is what funds the government until March. Hopefully he won't be successful in doing that, and we'll have more time to fight against that in the new year. There was a very good letter that closed today, introduced by Congressman Greg Casar, who will be the new head of the Progressive Caucus in the next Congress. And that said, in light of Israel not following through on what it was supposed to do, according to what Biden had asked, there should be no more offensive weapons sent to Israel. And he had 18 co-sponsors. There was a letter by Representative Jason Crow that had a lot of co-sponsors, 75 of them, and that's because it was more watered down and just asked the administration for an accounting of what Israel has done, or more particularly not done, since that Austin Blinken letter was sent to Netanyahu. And just for a reminder for some of you, in that letter, among the many things that it said Israel had to do was to increase the number of trucks for humanitarian aid to be 350 a day. And what we heard that the month of December was actually more than came in October, November, which was almost nothing. And now it's up to about 80 trucks a day. This is obviously not near 350 and not even close to what it was before October 7th, which was 500 a day. There is a new letter from Senator Welsh that asks for temporary protective status for Palestinians, saying that they need to be protected from deportation. That's a very positive thing. And some of you might have remembered the woman Aishinur Egi, who was from Seattle, went to be a observer in the West Bank and was shot by an Israeli sniper. Her family, including her husband and her sister, were in Washington, D.C. the last 2 days. They had a meeting with Secretary Blinken, and unfortunately, that meeting went very poorly in that they weren't promised anything. They were asking for an independent investigation because Israel is not doing it. And they also asked for all the information that the U.S. knows to be released to them. They didn't get any positive response from Blinken on any of that. And they came out and talked to the press and said how disappointed they were in the meeting. They did have a number of Congress people come with them to a press conference today, and they went to meet to a number of offices of Congress people. And it was great having them on the Hill, but unfortunate that we can't even get our own government to do anything to try to get justice for U.S. citizens killed by Israelis. And then some of you might have seen that Amnesty International released a very, very extensive report about and called it a genocide, what is happening now. Many people ask, why did it take them so long? But it did because they are very meticulous. I would say they probably also were concerned about losing a lot of funders, but to their credit, they did it, and it is an extremely, extremely well-documented report that is hard to refute. Of course, AIPAC came up and immediately said that it was refuted it, and so did a couple of Congress people. But for the most part, it has been very positively received, and is one more thing that we can use in our efforts as we talk to members of Congress. And finally, I want to mention that today was also the filing of a lawsuit introduced by a group called Dawn, Democracy in the Arab World Now, on behalf of Palestinians both in Gaza and the West Bank and Palestinian Americans. 5 of them, but more will be signing on, suing the State Department for having totally disregarded U.S. law, meaning the Leahy law, that says that we cannot give military aid to units that are committing war crimes. And it was very exciting to see their lawsuit presented today by former members of the State Department, like Josh Paul, like Charles Blaha, as well as a representative from Gaza whose family has been under attack, as well as respected legal experts and a former senior staffer from Leahy's office who wrote the law. So that was very exciting. And the last thing I want to mention is, while we are going to be talking with Vijay about what is happening in Syria, let's keep in our minds that there is a lot of threats right now from people in the Trump administration about attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. And perhaps that might be the focus of our next CODEPINK Congress, but it is very worrisome to hear the kind of language that is being used to threaten Iran. So those are some updates. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Medea. You know, on CODEPINK Congress, we try to stay on top of what Congress is doing and keep an eye out. And we are so grateful to you, Medea, for walking the halls with people. I don't know, any day, every day, any day, you have what, 25, 30 people going to these offices. And I bring this up because CODEPINK is a 501c3 and we need donations. I want to thank those of you who gave last time. We met our goal of $1,000 and I would like to meet that goal again tonight. CODEPINK is a group of very committed activists. We have East Coast organizers, West Coast organizers. We've now launched chapters all over the country because we know that's what it's going to take, right? It's going to take a lot of on the ground organizing, pressure on Congress and pressure on corporations that are complicit in this genocide. We cannot do that without your help, without your support. We're all in this together. And, you know, I've been on Zooms, I'm sure you have too, where you can't even communicate with anyone in the chat. They won't let you talk to anyone except maybe the panelists. We really want to encourage dialogue here. That's what we're all about. We have a lot of campaigns. Of course, we have the Palestine campaign. We have peace in Ukraine, where we are pushing for a ceasefire, for a diplomatic resolution. Perhaps we will see that day. I know that Trump is saying, oh, that'll be more difficult than Gaza. I don't know. But we need to keep the pressure on. And I'm so grateful to you, Medea, for walking those halls of Congress. And let's see if we can raise at least $1,000 tonight. And we'll check in at the end to see if we met our goal. And if you give, you know, you can give $1. You give $5, $500. $5,000. When you give, if you want to give in the name of somebody, put it in the chat. I am donating. I am contributing to CODEPINK. I am proudly contributing in the name of. And we'll check back in and see if we meet our goal of $1,000. I don't know if VJ has joined us yet. If not, we can go to those videos. If you haven't been on social media, you may have missed these incredible disruptions CODEPINK is known for, right, of hearings, one of which involved a Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. Why don't we play that right now?
VJ's here, Mercy.
Oh, okay. Well, stay tuned then. We'll play those videos after VJ speaks because we don't want to keep him waiting. And it's just, you know, my honor to introduce VJ Prashad, who describes himself as a Marxist intellectual. He is the director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He has written 30 books. Can you believe that? And he's a great friend of CODEPINK. Welcome back to CODEPINK Congress, VJ Prashad.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks. It was great to listen to Medea's summary of the various pushes and prods, and also to you about raising money for CODEPINK to do the important work you're doing. I mean, you know, the United States government, all told, between Biden and then Trump, it's a government that is so dangerous and so willful in use of power that every bit of work you do is so important for the world, you know, to try and prevent the United States just marching us to extinction. Because really, that's the threat. I mean, how many countries does the US government want to go to war against? You know, it's a proxy in Ukraine. I'm going to talk about Syria, but I mean, Gaza, and then the threats every day on China. I mean, take it easy, guys. I always say, you know, build your own infrastructure before you go and bomb other people's. Lots of things to build in the United States. Don't waste your time bombing other people's stuff. You know, spend the money building things. I very much hope, but it's unlikely, that Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk will discover that there isn't any more social welfare to cut. Bill Clinton already did that. That if they're going to cut anything, it's going to have to be the war machine. And if they are sincere people, which they're not, they're going to have to tackle that. And unfortunately, because they are insincere and so on, they're not going to touch it, you know, which is why I think in the end of the day, for all his blather, Trump is not going to go against the war machine, even when it comes to Ukraine. But, we'll see. I hope he's more of a maverick than even people imagine. But I think the pressures of the arms industry are very great. To understand what's happening in Syria it requires a lot of time. And I don't want to, waste your time going over every single detail. It takes a lot of time because it's a complicated situation. I mean, it's very difficult to just sort of brush off the fact that the Assad family has governed Syria for 53 years. And, the son, Bashar al-Assad, was really a reluctant head of government. His brother was to have taken over. It's an unfortunate situation that Syria, this great civilization, was falling into dynasty rule. Hafiz al-Assad, the father, who had taken power in a coup, could very well have groomed talented people in the country and so on. There's no need to go to your family. He went to his son. There was a political opening in 2000 when Bashar al-Assad came to power, when petty bourgeois intellectuals, many of the left, started something called the Damascus Spring. And they started a discussion about, having different voices in government. Mr. Assad actually is a young ophthalmologist from England. Again, as I said, a very reluctant president, took them seriously and encouraged the Damascus Spring. But then there was a snapback. They cracked down, threw people in prison, and just said, no, we can't tolerate this. Even though this came from a largely Republican, secular, and even communist petty bourgeoisie that was, pushing this. You can't just ignore all that. That's also true. But that's not the story that we just saw on the 7th of December. It's an error to go with CNN into the prisons of Syria and say, well, that's where you can get the answer to what happened on the 7th of December. I mean, in that case, we can go to the prisons of the United States and look and see how many people are in actual life sentences and the misery that they are put in under. Going to the prison is not the start of the story. And I think her name is Christine Ward, who faked a rescue of a prisoner, is emblematic of the lies that have come around what's going on. Actually, to better understand what's happening in Syria, we should go to the event that really changes the history of the Middle East, and that's the illegal US war against Iraq. It's one of the strangest things. United States, and I've said this many times, overthrows the Taliban and it overthrows Saddam Hussein. These are the two historical enemies of Iran. And by overthrowing Saddam Hussein, Iran gets a direct land route to assist Hezbollah. This was an enormous opening for Iran. United States, basically figures this out right after Saddam Hussein is overthrown, and hastily the US Congress passes an act called the Syria Accountability Act and Lebanese Restoration of Sovereignty Act. That's the name of this, fabulous act from 2003, because the US government figures out right after Saddam is gone that it had miscalculated, that really the victor of the US illegal war on Iraq was Iran. Iran was going to benefit in Iraq. Iran was going to have a land route through Syria, and Iran was going to be able to resupply Hezbollah. That act, 2003, already starts the sanctions on Syria. The sanctions don't start in 2012. They begin in 2003. Then, because it doesn't seem to work, the US government greenlights Israel's attack on Lebanon in 2006, when Israel launches a massive bombing campaign of Lebanon to basically decapitate Hezbollah. Israel does not succeed. Hezbollah prevails. These are all the attempts, in a way, to break Iran's power in the Mediterranean coastline. That's the principal axis of the US intervention at this period. After 2006, the failure of Israel's war in Lebanon, United States basically sits upon the sanctions policy on Syria, and that's about it. And then there is this Arab Spring that breaks out in Tunisia in 2010, has a contagious effect. comes to Daraa in southern Syria in 2011. There are signs in Homs, in Hama, and so on. These are, by and large, initially small groups of people. In Daraa, the governor operates extremely harshly against the protesters to the point that Mr. Assad has to come in and apologize for what has happened. He comes in and he sacks the governor and he says, this is not how we should behave. But it was by then too late. US ambassador went out onto the streets. This is extraordinary. Imagine if at Occupy Wall Street, for instance, in New York City, if the Cuban ambassador went to the Occupy Wall Street and gave a speech saying, what you are all doing is excellent, advance to socialism, comrades. I mean, they would be immediately thrown out of the country. The US might try one more bombing raid against Havana and so on. The US ambassador actually goes to the streets of small towns in Syria and says, I stand with you for freedom. I mean, it was amazing. The British ambassador then joins in. Now, what begins to happen very quickly is that the detritus of the US occupation of Iraq spills into Syria. In other words, when the United States overthrew the Saddam government in Iraq, there were a number of forces that emerged to fight against the United States. There were ex-military people from the Republican Guard and others. There were small bands of people associated with Muqtada al-Sadr, who is a major leader in particularly in Baghdad. But as well, there were groups that began to go to coalesce around a Jordanian radical by the name of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Some of you might remember al-Zarqawi. Around al-Zarqawi grew a kind of al-Qaeda grouping, and they brought, they attracted people from far away, including Syria. In fact, a young man by the name of his nom de guerre was Abu Musab al-Jolani, moves to Iraq. He joins the outfits after al-Zarqawi is killed. These groups basically are the al-Qaeda in the region of Iraq and eventually Syria. And then they become Jabhat al-Nusra. They are sent back to Syria when the rebellion starts in 2011. Jabhat al-Nusra means the support front. They were sent on behalf of al-Qaeda to support the uprising. Now, these groups arrived, and Jolani arrives as well in northern Syria, where the drought had been quite severe some years before the uprising, where Saudi preachers had come in under permission from the Assad government, unfortunately, and had created a constituency that was then picked up by Jabhat al-Nusra and other groups. Nusra radicalizes even deeper. It's an extraordinarily anti-Shia, anti-Alawite, anti-Christian organization. They begin the beheading and so on. A part of them goes later and forms ISIS. They form the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, or of al-Sham, Syria. Al-Jolani and people like him are fighting from the north of Syria. They make actually great gains. When I was reporting from Syria in 2013-14, I spent a couple of nights at one of the al-Qaeda camps. These were often young men from Algeria. Some of them, even at that time, came from the Turkish-speaking Central Asian republics, from Tajikistan, and there was one Uyghur, in fact, and this becomes important to the story. A number of the Uyghur radicals from Western China, moved through Turkey into the fight in northern Syria. In fact, the main Uyghur radical group had set up its office in Idlib, northern Syria. It's not in Urumqi or in Uzbekistan anymore. They moved their center of operations to northern Syria. This group, very radical, very much a Islamist group, with a Sunni, tendency, very strongly radical group, is sitting in the north and is being backed by the Turks. The Turkish government was frustrated because their principal proxy, the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, sitting in Istanbul, their headquarters were in Istanbul. These sort of petty bourgeois people of the right the pious petty bourgeoisie, not like the petty bourgeois of the Damascus Spring. This section sitting in Istanbul were not able to make any gains on the ground. The Turkish-backed army, an army that they called also the Syrian army, they were not making major gains, and they were being obliterated by groups like Jabhat al-Nusra, which then morphed into a number of groups. In 2016, as a way to differentiate itself from al-Qaeda, this group Jabhat al-Nusra is disbanded. Jolani and others say we are no longer part of al-Qaeda, and they create a new movement, the Group to Liberate Syria, Hayat Tariq al-Shams, HTS, which is the group that is now in Damascus. This group is backed by the Turks because it's the most effective fighting force, and they take control of a bunch of northern cities. When the Iranians and the Russians and Hezbollah intervene on behalf of the Syrian government, they box these rebels in to northern Syria, into a number of cities, parts of Aleppo, in Idlib, and so on. And slowly they just go and gather in Idlib and in the countryside of the north, again defended by the Turks. Twice the Syrian Arab Army, the army of the Syrian government, and the Russians in particular tried to push them out across the border into Turkey, at which point the Turks invade Syria for the second time. This is in 2020, and they cut a deal with the Russians and the Syrians to say, look, don't touch the people in Idlib. Okay, pause. This group HTS is in Idlib. It's very important to remember that by 2020, when there's this agreement between Turkey and the Syrians and Russians not to touch this group in Idlib, by 2020, Syria is already deeply balkanized and weakened. In the eastern part of Syria, the United States occupied since 2017. It has occupied the oil fields, and it occupies several important roads that connect major cities like Deir ez-Zor and so on. It's one of those fallacies of the US government. They'll say, we are withdrawing from Syria. That's what Trump said in 2019. We are withdrawing. They withdrew the regular forces, but they left behind 1,000 special forces. And those 1,000 special forces are constantly reinforced. It's not a question that they control all of the oil in eastern Syria, and they are reinforced by US troops that are on the Iraqi side of the border. They have never really withdrawn from the Kurdish autonomous region. Secondly, in the north of Syria, the north central is basically an autonomous region controlled by the Kurdish forces, particularly the YPG, the protection group of the Kurds. It's basically the PKK in Syria, the Kurdish Workers' Party. And in the northwest, Turkey has taken an enormous swath of Syria. So the north and the east have not been part of the government's control since at least 2012, if not 2017, when the US comes in. Then, if you go further south, the Israelis had already taken the Golan Heights in 1973, and right after the protests began, the Israelis created a division called Division 210, which was basically trained to go into Syria and keep eating territory. You might be interested to know that since the fall of the Assad government, the Israelis have taken more territory in Syria than the whole of Gaza. They have moved rapidly to the border of major cities in western Syria. And then, of course, it is also true that large military bases had been taken by the Russians and the Iranians and so on. In the south, where there had been protests from the beginning in Dara and so on, the Syrian government cut peace deals, which were effectively autonomy for that region. So the Syrian government was controlling the city of Damascus and road M5, which goes up to Hama, Homs, and Aleppo, and controlling those three cities, as well as the coastal area of Latakia, the city of Tartus, and so on. That was what the government was controlling. The rest of the country had already been taken away, and the US government had placed vicious sanctions on the country, sanctions tantamount to what was on Iraq in the 1990s, except Iraq had food for oil and the Syrians didn't. So Syria was not able to properly pay its military. The military was hugely demoralized. Then, right when the genocidal campaign by Israel was going on, and when Israel pivots to start bombing Hezbollah and kills Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, Netanyahu made a decision to go and pummel all the Syrian military bases along road number M5. That's the road that goes from Damascus all the way up to basically to Aleppo through Hama and Homs. And by bombing all these military bases, by bombing Iranian bases, by bombing logistical depots, they basically destroyed the Syrian military. Effectively, the Israeli Air Force provided air support for the former al-Qaeda fellows that came down south and just walked into Damascus. It was a cakewalk. It was provided by the Israelis and the Turks. The Turks provided military support. The Israelis bombed. This is not a revolution. It's very much an error. In fact, I was interested that the New York Times, I think today, ran a story about the governance of HTS in the city of Idlib, where they banned music, they banned all kinds of things. This is not a democratic force. This is the United States effectively backing the Syrian version of the Taliban, except they learned some lessons. They plucked out al-Jolani. Somebody took him somewhere. It's very interesting. I did some research on this. In the last year or 2 years, a number of Israeli think tanks had done studies on Syria, where these think tank officials had gone to Idlib and interviewed al-Jolani. He was happy to talk to the Israelis over the last 2 years about the situation. So they cite him, interview with Abu Musab al-Jolani, 2023. Interview with Abu Musab al-Jalani, 2022. But I don't think the Israelis did this. This is high-level public relations. I mean, the interview he gave, the exclusive to CNN, is it's sublime. He sits there and he says, yes, I did bad things in Iraq, but effectively youthful indiscretions. I'm a different person now. He was wearing this nondescript khaki shirt. Some people online said he dressed like Zelensky. He had trimmed his beard. He didn't talk about religion or about his views on social life. He basically said, we're going to be democratic. We're not going to harm people and so on. Extraordinary good packaging. I mean, you couldn't have done it better. Al-Jolani now is not what Al-Jolani was before. Syria has been deeply weakened. This means a weakening of Iran. This means that their ambitions, as Medea said earlier, to go and hit Iran are now very, very strong. They've weakened at least 2 of the main so-called proxies that could threaten Israel if Iran is attacked. One is Hezbollah, which has been deeply weakened after the assassination of Syed Hassan Nasrallah. Secondly, by not having Assad there, and by basically sending all the Iraqi groups back to Iraq, having al-Jolani make a public statement saying we won't allow attacks on Israel from our soil. Israel now has no neighbor that threatens it. Neither Jordan, nor Egypt, nor Lebanon, nor Syria are going to threaten Israel. And the only threat that remains is Yemen, where the Yemeni government of Ansar Allah continues to pummel the Iliad port, which is on the Bay of Aqaba. They continue to hit it. That port has been out of commission for several months now. But there's no real threat that the so-called Iran proxies can muster. There's a big debate to have about whether these are really Iranian proxies or not. But at least in the eyes of Israel and the United States, these were. And that they are out of commission means that the United States is going to feel, and Trump is going to feel, absolutely as if there is nothing to prevent him from going and bombing, let's say, 4 or 5 sites in Iran, nuclear sites, military sites, and so on. This is a catastrophe because, we always say if they do this, the jaws of hell will open. Yeah, if they attacked Iraq, the jaws of hell open very slowly. I started by saying that this particular catastrophe begins with the illegal war on Iraq. I mean, all of us fought against that war. all of us said this is a catastrophe for the world, and it continues to be a catastrophe. The jaws of hell don't open quickly, they open very slowly. And I think I would fear that the next step for these guys, because they are dangerous, they are decadent people, the next step for these guys is, well, now that there's nobody that can threaten Israel, and the US Navy is basically garrisoning the Mediterranean, let's go and hit Iran. And friends, you are very much needed, because a war in Iran is really a war on civilization. I don't know how to put it any other way. I very much hope it can be stopped, because it's definitely the next step on their very unseemly ladder to trying to maintain world power when they can't produce things that compete against, let's say, the Asian economies. You can't produce proper phones, you can't produce proper bridges, you can only produce bombs. Well, that's your comparative advantage. I guess if you're all Ricardians, then you're just going to bomb the world.
Well, Vijay Prashad, thank you so much for your encyclopedic overview of the history of Syria and where we are today. I know we have a lot of questions that people want to ask. I have two that I'm really anxious to pose to you. And one is, I was on social media today and I was reading how HTS is telling Israel to stop bombing all of these bases in Syria. Enough. And so I wonder, how long is this partnership going to last? And will that slow down Israel's ambitions to annex Syria, all of Syria? Who knows what, right? And the other question I have is how the collapse of Assad will impact Russia and Ukraine and the US proxy war there.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be quite blunt on your second question, this is a real blow for Russia's ability to have relations with African governments, because Russia was using the Damascus airport to resupply its military planes flying to Africa, where it was assisting some governments, which has created a controversy in the United States. I mean, this is going to be difficult now. I mean, there's going to be no airport where a Russian military plane can land anywhere in the arc going from France out to Afghanistan. I very much doubt they're going to be able to land anywhere. Maybe they'll try to make a relationship with the Yemenis, but you can imagine how that will go down. I mean, I don't know. I think it's very dangerous. I hope that that's not the option. Russia is trying to negotiate, to hold on to its naval base. It's a huge issue for the Russians, because then they're out of the Mediterranean. If they, Crimea and Tartus were their two warm water ports. To lose one of them is a big deal for the Russian Navy. But, because climate change is being accelerated, soon they can keep their Navy in the Arctic during the winter months. That's not even a joke. I mean, the channel is beginning to lose tight packed ice formation. But it's an issue, for Iran, for Russia, and so on. For these countries, it's a big thing, because Hezbollah is on its own now. There's no way for Iran to resupply Hezbollah. No way. And, we are practical people. We are for peace, but that doesn't mean we are for surrender. These people have been defending themselves. Now they are defenseless. The Israelis will walk into Lebanon whenever they want. They'll allow Hezbollah to fire 1,000 rockets and then they just stroll in. There's no defense, because they won't be able to resupply themselves. They will have no border or waterway from which they can get sufficient ammunition. So this is a big blow for these defensive powers. For the Palestinian resistance, it's a huge blow. It's not true that the Palestinian groups are proxies of Israel. Okay, that's the language of the right. But it is true that Iran and countries like Iran were helping the Palestinian resistance. And the thing is, like, I found it frustrating to hear people talk about Iran. Iran doesn't need to support the Palestinians. They could just stop, and then so many of their problems would go away. The main problem Iran has is with Israel. And the main problem Iran has with Israel is that Iran is a major supporter of the Palestinian resistance. They don't need to do it. It's bringing them more grief. If they cut a deal with the Israelis, that's a deal with the Americans. They could be fine. But they are refusing, because they are resolute. They are not like the Jordanian government or the Egyptian government. You got to give them credit there. And I think people don't recognize that Israel's foe in the region is Iran, because Iran is the most reliable supporter of the Palestinian resistance, despite the fact that the Palestinians are not Shia. This is not a sectarian thing. This is a belief that they have. It's important to recognize that. I mean, on the first question, who knows? Strange bedfellows can remain strange bedfellows for a long time. It's also important to know that while Israel is pummeling these military bases, particularly up in Tartus, which are old Syrian military bases, that means they are also helping this rebel group. But there are also aerial bombardment by the United States of ISIS positions, what they claim are ISIS positions, because they fear that the victory of Julani's HTS in Damascus is going to embolden ISIS to make a push for Damascus. So the US is bombing ISIS. I mean, there's a lot of bombing happening in Syria. In fact, again, even the god-awful New York Times has a piece about who's bombing Syria. And they list the countries that are currently bombing Syria, one of them, United States.
Medea, thank you
Well,
so much.
Speaking of who's bombing who and the strange bedfellows, so the US is supporting the Kurdish groups, and Turkey is determined to use this opportunity to wipe them out. And Turkey is a member of NATO and a US ally. So how does that all square?
I mean, it doesn't, Medea, and it hasn't since the defense of Kobane in 2014. You remember when Kobane, the city in northern Syria, had been taken by the Kurdish resistance forces. They were surrounded by ISIS, and people will remember this was an enormous issue because it looked like Kobane was going to fall. At which point there was US air support. The United States hit ISIS hard in its forward positions and forced the ISIS fighters to retreat. I mean, when we're talking about forward positions, we're talking about ISIS fighters in Toyota trucks. They didn't have tanks. I mean, it was an easy. Nobody in that region was fighting with air support. The moment you get air support, you can vanquish your foes, which is why Russian air support was so vital for the maintenance of the Damascus government after 2012, and particularly after they fully intervened in 2015. But that issue of the Kurds has been there for a long time. And there are all kinds of beliefs and questions raised. The Kurdish groups in northern Syria made a deal with the United States, but also with the Israelis. Just as the Kurds had done in Iraq, made a deal with the Israelis, in order to basically get protection against the Turks. But the Turks are resolute that their political challenge comes from the Kurds. And even though Abdullah Öcalan, the overall leader of the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, who's been in jail for decades, even though Öcalan has said, look, we don't want a Kurdish state. We want better rights within Turkey. There's more than 1 million, some people say 2 million Kurds living in Istanbul. I mean, there is no way they're going to be ethnically cleansed to southeastern Turkey, to a big Kurdish state. They are rooted in Istanbul. So Öcalan said, look, we just want more rights. Even though he has made a public declaration, he has said to the Turkish government, let's talk. The Turkish government is determined to destroy the PKK. I mean, it should be said, Kurds are not a homogeneous group. They're very wide range. In fact, when I visited the southeastern part of Turkey, it's quite stunning to see how deeply pious the community is and how many Kurds voted for Erdogan. It's not a monolithic community. There are Kurds who are communists. There are Kurds who are deeply pious and vote for the AKP party. That's just a reality of politics. But Erdogan is hell-bent on destroying the PKK. And that means, if it means destroying the YPG in Syria, that's what they're going to do. This is an enormous opportunity. Plus, it should be said that there are a large number of historical Ottoman sites in northern Syria that Turkey wants to go and seize. The founder of the Ottoman Empire is buried there. They want all of that territory. And it looks likely that in the deal that will come eventually with Damascus, with Jolani and others, that Turkey is just going to take a huge part of northern Syria. United States is going to permanently sit in eastern Syria. And you know, the Israelis are going to have, they've taken the 74 UN buffer zone. They are going to go beyond that and take more territory. I mean, Syria as we knew it when we were growing up is no longer going to exist. In fact, it doesn't exist now.
Vijay Prashad, thank you so much for joining us on CODEPINK Congress. We have learned so much listening to you. And I urge everyone to take a look at Vijay's articles. We've posted them in the chat, and to thank him as well. So let's unmute and thank Vijay Prashad for joining us, Director of
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank
you,
you. That was
Vijay.
amazing.
Oh my God, thank you so much. Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vijay.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Medea. Thank you.
I know a lot of people listen to him for hours, right? He has so much information and such a good analysis. If you appreciated what you heard, please do help us raise $1,000 tonight for CODEPINK Congress, for us to come to the first and third Tuesday of the month, for Medea to walk the halls of Congress, for us to continue CODEPINK radio broadcast on most of the Pacifica stations nationwide. And we now have a new campaign as well, and that is Expel the ADL. That's the Anti-Defamation League that is deep into our schools around the country. Peddling anti-Semitism is the same thing as anti-Zionism, to chill speech during U.S.-Israel genocide in Gaza. We cannot allow this to continue. Sometimes we can be most effective on the local level. So do join us. You can email me, Marcy, M-A-R-C-Y, at codepink.org, to join our Expel the ADL campaign and to meet with your school board members, your instructional superintendents, and say, we do not want the Israel lobby indoctrinating our students, because they are the future generation, right? This is where the battle is, and the ADL knows this is where the battle is. So please do help us raise some money tonight. $1,000, that's our goal. And Grace, feel free to chime in once we come close. All right, with that, we are going to look at some videos before we go to our Capitol calling party. We're going to be calling Congress in just a minute to say no on the NDAA. It will pass, but we do want them to hear what we have to say about it. And also to say, U.S. out of Syria, stop bombing Syria, lift those sanctions, stop. So
And
before we
troops out of Syria.
troops
Martha.
out of Syria, that's right.
You know, there are some statements that Trump has made, and he tried to get troops out of Syria when he was in last time and couldn't do it. And he has come out and said, this is not our fight, we should not be involved. So shoring up that idea of troops out of Syria would be a great thing to do.
Yes, and if you haven't signed the petition that Grace posted in the chat, please do. With that, let's take a look at what CODEPINK has been up to on Capitol Hill.
This is from this week,
Yeah.
last week, yeah.
The people of Afghanistan over those.
People will never let you forget. We will suspend. You've killed hundreds of thousands from your cozy little office. Slide. Many will be responsible for the deaths of all of Gaza. People in Yemen, people in Iraq, Syria.
Let's add none.
People of Afghanistan over those.
Why didn't you stop?
Well,
I think we
that
showed
was-
the wrong one. We wanted to show the one with 3 interventions. But
that's all right.
That's okay.
I think we got the idea. Is disrupting those hearings and calling out Secretary of State Blinken, who lied so boldly to Congress and said, oh, the aid's getting through, when he knew it was not. We're calling him out. Please help us raise some money tonight, and be my guest and dedicate your donation to somebody that you love or you respect, and let us know in the chat. All right, with that, we're going to go to our Capitol calling party. This is where we pick up the phone and call 202-224-3121. Here's the script. So we have two asks tonight, and this is to our senators. Senator, vote no on the NDAA. That's the military budget. It's almost $1 trillion now. People here are living paycheck to paycheck. Bernie said that just a day ago. He had an op-ed. 60% of the U.S. is living paycheck to paycheck. And oppose U.S. intervention in Syria. Congress must demand the U.S. stop bombing Syria, remove U.S. troops, and lift U.S. sanctions. Thank you. So we're going to call Capitol Hill right now, take the next 5 to 10 minutes and see if we can make at least one call.